Have you ever been so tired of trying that quitting started to feel like wisdom? Not laziness, wisdom. Like maybe the smartest thing you could do for yourself, the most self-aware and honest decision, was to accept that this particular dream simply wasn't for you and let it go before it cost you anything more. Maybe you have been at this for 2 years or 5 or longer, and the progress has been so slow, so uneven, so invisible to everyone around you, that you've started to wonder whether what you call persistence is really just an unwillingness to face the truth. Maybe you've watched people start after you and finish before you, and the gap between where you are and where you thought you'd be by now has started to feel less like a delay and more like a verdict. Maybe the cruelest part is this: you are not someone who gives up easily. You have stayed when others left. You have tried again when failing once would have been enough for most people. And still, it hasn't happened. And the question you are afraid to ask out loud is beginning to form itself anyway. What if I'm just not going to make it? If you've ever felt like you were standing on the edge of giving up on the very thing you were built to do, this story is for you. Because once there was a man who quit on the last day before everything changed, and what he learned in the wreckage of that decision altered the way he understood effort, proximity, and the hidden geometry of how breakthroughs actually arrive. Stay with me until the end. In a Rust Belt city where the old factories had been replaced by co-working spaces and optimism, was a renewable resource nobody could quite afford. There lived a 34-year-old software developer named Norris. Norris had grown up the second of 4 children in a Trinidadian household where his mother worked 2 jobs, and his father's advice about money was the same every time: never owe anyone anything you can't pay back tomorrow. He had taken that advice and expanded it into a philosophy: never invest more than you can afford to lose. Norris believed, at his core, that sensible people recognized their limits and adjusted accordingly. "There's no shame in being realistic," he would say when friends pushed him to go further, bet bigger, hold on longer. He called it pragmatism. What it was, dressed up in the language of maturity, was a way of leaving before he could be left, a way of failing on his own terms before the world could fail him on its. 3 years earlier, Norris had begun building a financial planning tool for first-generation immigrants, people like his parents, who had navigated a new country's tax codes, pension systems, and banking structures without anyone to explain the rules. He knew the problem intimately because he had lived inside it. He had the technical skill to solve it. He had, in his first year, built something genuinely useful, but the users weren't coming fast enough. The growth was slow. The feedback was good, but the numbers were small. And Norris, who never invested more than he could afford to lose, had been mentally preparing his exit for 6 months, waiting, he told himself, for one clear sign that it was time to be realistic. In the same co-working space worked a woman named Tammy. Tammy was building a language learning platform for adult migrants, a narrower problem than Norris's, a smaller initial market, and a product that had, in its first 8 months, attracted fewer users than his. When Norris met her, she was on her second failed launch, rebuilding her onboarding flow for the 3rd time and visibly exhausted. He had privately assumed she would be gone within a year. 18 months later, Tammy's platform had been featured in a national newspaper, accepted into a prestigious accelerator program, and closed a seed round of $280,000. She sat 3 desks from Norris on a Tuesday afternoon, headphones on, entirely focused, building the thing she had refused to stop building. Norris looked at her and felt something he did not have a clean word for. Not envy exactly, something closer to grief, because Tammy had been behind him once. And she had stayed, and he was almost gone. On a Thursday evening in November, Norris typed and sent an email to the 2 investors he had been in conversation with, withdrawing from discussions. The product was not scaling at a pace that justified continued development, he wrote. He would be returning to full-time employment and winding the project down over the coming weeks. He thanked them for their time. He pressed send. Then he closed his laptop and sat in the co-working space as the last of the evening light left the windows and the cleaners began moving through the room around him. He had expected to feel relief. That was what he had told himself quitting would feel like, the relief of honesty, of facing reality, of stopping the bleeding. He did not feel relief. He felt something hollow and specific settle into the center of his chest, and he recognized it immediately because he had felt it once before, as a teenager. When he had dropped out of a mathematics competition, he was quietly certain he could have won. He had called it pragmatism then too. He was still sitting there, laptop closed, coat on, unable to stand up and leave, when the cleaners turned off the lights in the back half of the room. And in the near dark, for the first time in 3 years of building, Norris let himself say the thing he had never said. I don't actually know that I was going to fail. I just know that I was tired. He sat with that sentence for a long time. Then he took his phone out and called his old university professor, a man named Radolf, who had taught him computational mathematics, and who had, over 20 years, become the kind of mentor who answered the phone at 9 in the evening without asking why. Radolf picked up on the second ring. He listened without interrupting for 4 minutes while Norris explained what he had done, what he had felt, and what he had said to himself in the dark. When Norris stopped talking, Radolf was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Have you eaten?" "No," Norris said. "Come to the house. I want to show you something before you decide this is final." Norris arrived 40 minutes later. Radolf's study was the same as it had always been: books on 3 walls, a whiteboard covered in notation, a small lamp that made everything look like it was being thought about seriously. Norris sat in the chair across from the desk and said, before he could stop himself, "Tell me honestly, do you think I was close, or was I just fooling myself?" Radolf looked at him steadily. "That," he said, "is precisely the wrong question, and I'm going to show you why." Radolf turned to the whiteboard and drew a single horizontal line from one edge to the other. At the left end he wrote, "Start." At the right end he wrote, "Breakthrough." Then he drew a vertical mark somewhere past the middle, closer to the right end than the left, and labeled it, "You are here." Then he picked up a piece of chalk, a short, worn stub, almost too small to hold, and placed it on the tray beneath the board. "This chalk," he said, "has been writing on boards in this room for 11 years. Do you know what happens to chalk as it gets smaller?" He waited. "It writes darker. The pressure per square millimeter increases. The mark it leaves gets stronger, more defined, more permanent, right up until the moment there is nothing left." He picked up the stub. "Chalk does its most significant work in the final fraction of its life, and it cannot know, as it shortens, how close to that fraction it is." He set it down and looked at Norris. "You have been measuring your progress by the chalk's length. Here are 3 things you have not understood about where you actually are. Law 1. Breakthroughs do not scale with effort, they arrive after it. Every significant achievement in a human life follows the same invisible structure. A long, largely featureless period of accumulation, followed by a sudden and disproportionate result that appears, from the outside, to have come from nowhere. It did not come from nowhere. It came from every day of the accumulation period that produced no visible result. The work you did in the slow years was not wasted. It was loading. And loading, by definition, looks identical to failing right up until the moment the release happens. The reason most people quit is not that they were wrong about the destination. It is that they quit during the loading phase in the final weeks before the release, because loading and failing are indistinguishable from the inside. You cannot know how close the release is. You can only know whether you have stopped loading. Law 2. Proximity is invisible. Measure inputs, never distance. The single most dangerous question you can ask when pursuing something difficult is, how far am I from the goal? It is dangerous because you cannot answer it accurately. You have no map that shows you where the breakthrough is. You cannot measure a distance you cannot see. What you can measure, the only thing you can measure, is whether you did the work today. Not whether it moved you closer, not whether it was enough, not whether you are on pace. Did you do the work? That question has a yes or no answer that is entirely within your control. Shift your entire system of measurement from distance to inputs. Track what you do, not what has not yet happened. The goal is not closer or further based on your feelings about it. It is closer or further based on whether you showed up. Show up. Count that. Only that. Law 3. The people depending on the answer need you to stay in the room. You built this tool for people like your parents, people who arrived in a new country without a guide, without someone who spoke their financial language, without any of the invisible advantages that make navigating an unfamiliar system survivable. Those people are not abstractions. They are specific human beings who are, right now, making expensive mistakes that your tool would prevent. If it existed, if it reached them, if you stayed long enough to make it real. Quitting a pursuit with that kind of weight attached to it is not pragmatism. It is a choice about whose inconvenience matters more, yours or theirs. That is not a comfortable sentence. It is not meant to be. It is meant to ask you one more time whether the tiredness you feel tonight is bigger than the problem you set out to solve. Only you can answer that, but I need you to answer it honestly with the full weight of both sides. Radolf picked up the chalk stub one more time and held it between two fingers. How much writing do you think is left in this? He asked. Norris looked at it. Not much, he said. Maybe a few lines. Maybe, Radolf said. Or maybe enough to write the most important thing I've ever put on this board. The chalk cannot know. He placed it back on the tray with care. Neither can you. Norris drove home in silence. He did not sleep much. But in the morning before 7, he opened his laptop and sent a second email to the two investors asking, with as much honesty as he had ever put in a business communication, whether they would be willing to continue the conversation. He told them he had made a decision in exhaustion and wanted to revisit it with clearer eyes. He did not dress it up. He just sent it. One investor did not reply. The second, a woman who had built and sold 2 fintech businesses before the age of 45, replied within 3 hours. Her message was 4 sentences. The last one was, "The honesty in this email tells me more about your character than 18 months of pitch decks. Let's talk Friday." They talked on Friday, and again the following Tuesday. 6 weeks later, she committed $95,000 in angel funding. Not because the metrics had changed, but because Norris, in the weeks between the Thursday night he had almost quit and the Friday he had asked for a second chance, had done 3 things differently. He had narrowed the product's scope to one precise use case: pension enrollment guidance for first-generation immigrants in their first 3 years of employment. He had reached out directly to 14 community organizations that served that population and asked for 30 minutes with their coordinators. 11 said yes. 9 became partners. The user numbers that had been growing at 40 new accounts per month reached 260 in the month the partnerships activated. By the end of that quarter, 940 active users. By the end of the following quarter, 3,200 and a waiting list. Norris called his mother on a Sunday evening, 8 months after the night he had sat in the dark co-working space in his coat. He told her what the product did, how many people were using it, what problem it was solving. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the particular tone she reserved for things she had known for a long time and was finally being given permission to say, "That is exactly the thing that would have helped us when we arrived. Exactly that." He called Radolf the same evening. The chalk had more in it, he said. Radolf laughed, a short, warm sound. It always does, he said. The problem is you can never tell from the length. My friend, Norris's story is not about software or fintech or the mechanics of finding investors. It is about the night every person who has ever built something meaningful has faced. The night when exhaustion puts on the costume of wisdom and tells you that stopping is the intelligent choice. That night will come for you if it hasn't already. And when it does, I need you to remember 3 things before you send the email, make the call, or close the door. First, the loading phase and the failing phase look identical. You cannot tell them apart from the inside. The only question that matters is whether you are still doing the work, Because the work is the loading, and the loading is what makes the release possible. Before you decide you are failing, ask yourself honestly, am I actually failing, or am I just in the part that looks like failing before the breakthrough arrives? Second, stop measuring distance and start measuring inputs. Today, write down one thing you will do, one specific, completable action that belongs to the thing you are building or pursuing. Not a goal, an action. Do it. Record that you did it. That record, accumulated over weeks and months, is the only honest map of how close you actually are. Distance is invisible. Input is real. Third, name the person your work is for. Not the market segment, not the user persona. One specific human being, real or representative, whose life your work is meant to change. Write that person's name or description somewhere you will see it every day. On the days the tiredness feels like wisdom, look at that name before you make any decision. Ask whether your exhaustion is bigger than their need. Let the answer guide you. Your challenge. Before this week ends, find the one thing you have been closest to quitting and ask yourself one honest question. Am I stopping because I have evidence it won't work, or because I am tired and tired looks like evidence when it is dark enough? If the answer is tiredness, stay one more week. Just one. The chalk may have more in it than you think, because here is what Norris learned and what I need you to carry with you. The breakthrough does not announce itself before it arrives. It only announces itself after. Which means the night it feels most impossible is the night you are most forbidden to quit. If this story reached the part of you that has been quietly thinking about stopping, share it with someone who needs to hear that they are closer than they know. Drop a comment and tell me, what is the one thing you have almost given up on that you are choosing to stay with for one more week? I read everyone. I will be back next week with another story. Until then, the chalk has more in it. Keep writing.